welcome. So, Ian, you do this kind of thing for a living. Let's first start with something simple, like Iran. Is the United States or Israel going to attack Iran in 2012?
Absolutely not. I can't see the United States doing it. Keep in mind, it's still Obama, no matter what happens with the elections in 2012, at least for the purposes of that year. And the Israelis are very highly incented to convince everyone that an attack could well come if they aren't satisfied. But if an attack's going to come from the Israeli perspective, it has to come from the U.S. And so these two sides aren't coming together. The sanctions are clearly going to escalate, and there's a lot of internal pressure within Iran. I mean, when you have a potential assassination against the Saudi ambassador to Washington, when you have a British embassy being occupied, what that's telling you is there's a lot of internal instability at the top of the Iranian regime. There's some risk takers, and there's some folks that may not like us, but they're much more pragmatic. That plays out potentially in dangerous ways in 2012, but that's very different from saying that we're going to take out or attempt to take out the nuclear program.
Henry, one of the things that I've heard in Washington is there are a lot of people in Washington who feel that the Israeli belligerence is an effort to play us rather than a signal that they are about to strike Iran. Do you think that that's right, that they're trying to say to us, look, we're getting really serious, so unless you guys in Washington do more, we might strike?
I do, but I don't think it's working. I think everybody knows where everybody else is in the game, and I agree with Ian that I don't think there'll be a strike. We'll just go ahead as we've been doing. The policy is not actually working. I mean, the Iranians are getting closer and closer to a nuclear weapon, but I don't see any overt attack. Covert, maybe. The one thing.
Anything?
Well, just I think what's been painted here is quite a benign scenario, one way or another, that you know, the worst is avoided, the real showdown, and if Ahmadinejad were to go one way or another, that would obviously be a good thing as far as the West is concerned. My fear is that it might not turn out quite as benign as that, and as the very least, I think and I hope that you're right, that Israel won't strike, but things could go wrong, and at the very least, I think there'll be a ratcheting up of the rhetoric. And it is, after all, a very, very serious existential, potentially, concern for Israel. So I think you could see some nasty moments in the coming year with Iran.
Anne-Marie said that she thought the policy wasn't working in the sense the Iranians were moving forward. What is your best sense as to what the trajectory is, you know, in terms of Iran's nuclear development?
Yeah, I think it's working for the Iranians, right? And I think that's part of the problem, right? I mean, in other words, that you can only get so much sanction against them. And I think this is part of the problem, is that, you know, the United States, the Brits, the Europeans are all moving towards much tougher sanctions against the Iranians. But you can't sanction on energy because in a recessionary environment or a low-growth environment, that's going to spike oil prices. Who's going to do that, election period or no? And you also can't get the Russians and Chinese to sign up to sanctions that are meaningful. This is not Libya where everyone's going to say, okay, go ahead, take these guys out. The Iranians know that. They have a lot of leverage. Their nuclear program continues. I think the real question, unlike North Korea, is would the Iranians actually test a nuke? There are lots of reasons they might not, right? One is that the Israelis have, we think, a couple hundred nuclear weapons. They've never tested one. If the Iranians do, what's the Israeli response? Do they suddenly force lots of Sunni states to move towards their own weapons if they do? So I think strategic ambiguity from the Iranian perspective is actually a reasonably serious strategy. No question that if Ahmadinejad stays in place and there's a big fight, there's greater potential for a rogue sort of action, which is very destabilizing, a la what we've seen out of the ISI in Pakistan. But that doesn't mean Israel's going to attack, and it also doesn't mean we see a nuclear weapon anytime soon that's literally on our horizon in 2012.
You mentioned Syria. Is Assad going to be in power by the end of 2012?
I do not think there's any chance that Assad will be in power by the end of 2012. Who will be in power, far more complicated, but I think the chances that he will hold on for another 12 months are nil.
Daniel?
I would agree with that. Well, not quite nil, because we saw in Libya how long